Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Bazydlo from Fairburn PD. He has almost 20 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to having him as a guest. So welcome to the show, Chief Bazydlo. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. No, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I know that wellness is a priority of yours, and you've done a lot of really great work building out a robust wellness program within your organization. I know you told me when we first spoke that October 2023 was kind of that time frame for you where you started really focusing on wellness and building out this robust wellness program organizationally. Why do you think that wellness is so important in law enforcement?
I think it's crucial. I read somewhere, and I don't have the proven statistics on this, but most people on average experience 5 to 10 traumatic events in their life, whereas law enforcement, 900, 1,000, 10 to 100 times as many as a normal person. So, people aren't meant to experience those kinds of repeated trauma and sights and sounds and images that are just very difficult to process. And for law enforcement, they become just kind of part of the job. And for a long time, I think we just treated wellness as something that was not really work related, like, you deal with it on your time off, go talk to your priest or your counselor or whoever makes you feel better. But it's not really, they weren't connecting it to work. Certainly in law enforcement, it never felt like that, at least. And I think when we put wellness in the front of our minds and think, okay, wellness is a required part of this job to make sure our officers are okay when they're out there and they're dealing with these sights and sounds and images. I think that you kind of change the game a little bit when you start to think, the after effect of what these men and women are doing in the course of their duty. We need to take care of those effects as well. So when they experience these traumas, we need to make sure that we're helping them to address them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really curious. Can you give us a little bit of background on you and how this job impacted you and your experiences with everything that you just described? Because I'm imagining that you have firsthand experience on what this job can do to you physically and mentally. So can you give us a little bit of background into you?
Definitely. So I am initially a graduate of Georgia State University, earned my bachelor's degree at Georgia State right here in Atlanta. Went on to get my master's degree in public safety administration. That was through the Georgia Law Enforcement Command College program. It's a very popular program here in Georgia. I've been with Fairburn for almost 20 years. Fairburn hired me on as an academy recruit. So I went to the police academy and worked my way up over the course of the last 2 decades to become the police chief. I became the police chief at the beginning of January 2023. So I'm in my 3rd year as chief now. And I've really enjoyed it. Fairburn is a suburban town. We're about 20 miles outside of Atlanta. So we're close enough to a big city to get, a lot of interesting calls and kind of being in that metro area of a large city. But we're far enough away where we still have a little bit of that suburb feel. So we're not a big town. We're not a small town. We're kind of right in that sweet spot in the middle. In terms of experience, just about any officer who's been doing this for more than a little bit of time has got some kind of story, For me personally, I had a particularly scary incident a number of years ago. I was still working the road. I was a sergeant at the time. And to make a very long story short, I ended up tussling with 2 guys, and the 2 guys were fighting over a gun. And as I'm, got my arms wrapped around one of the guys, the gun started going off. The bullet came out of the gun, hit the guy that I was wrapped up with. The bullet missed me by maybe a foot. It was very, very traumatic. It was a lot to process. I had to, of course, go home and tell my wife about it. I ended up going to therapy for it. And I think, I've not been shy about that. Certainly now that I'm chief, I talk to my officers about it. When they go through traumatic incidents, I'll be the first person to stand up and say, hey, maybe talking to a therapist, talking to a specialist, somebody who you're comfortable with, might be something beneficial, and kind of remove that negative stigma of seeking help when you've been through something traumatic, something that's, potentially life-threatening. I think it's important to just be head-on about it. So I've used that personal experience to kind of share with my officers now that I'm chief and say, hey, it's okay to get help.
Yeah. That story reminded me of why I got into this wellness space for law enforcement in the first place. And I was watching scenario training, and it was almost the same description that they were training for in that moment. And I remember being so stressed out, because I had worked with, the academy for a couple of years, but I had never sat in on a scenario training before. And it was very stressful. And the way that they had set it up was, flashing lights and dogs barking and, glass shattering and all this stuff. Right. And it's dark. And they were doing almost what you said. There was two people and they were like fighting for their lives. And I remember having a moment of like, oh my God, they're preparing for reality. Like it's not unrealistic to think that you would go through something like that. And at this time, they were so young, like this class, they were like 20, 21 years old. And I was like, man, it's not if, it's when, and it's how severe. And they need the tools and resources to be able to process those things, because I can't even imagine, how challenging that would be. And it's not a one-time thing. Like you said, maybe if you were someone in the general public that went through something like that, and after the fact, and it's not to diminish anything at all, everything is scary and, people are going to handle things in different ways, but maybe that's the one and only time that you would ever have to deal with it. But you in law enforcement, you have to get back out on the streets and potentially experience that over and over and over again. And so thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious, do you think that it's important for leadership to share those things to make wellness more normal and accepted?
Absolutely. Yes. I think when we share our own personal experience as leaders, it just kind of normalizes the process. I think when we, some of maybe the older school thinking was, just tough it out, suck it up, rub some dirt in it, you'll be all right. That's old thinking for a reason. I think when new officers, hear and see that their leaders not only have been through what they've been through, but recognize that it is a process, to work through those things. And it's not just a one size fits all situation that, everybody needs different things. I mentioned earlier, but, a priest, a therapist, a counselor, your spouse, your best friend, whoever it needs to be, it doesn't matter. But, you got to have that support system. And I think that's kind of another factor, is just having that support system both inside and outside of work. Most people have somebody they can lean on in their personal life. And I think it's important to know that they have people they can lean on when they're at work too, and it's not just two completely separate, distinct worlds, that work and personal can kind of blend together when it comes to wellness, because wellness is the goal, whether you're at work or on your time off. You should feel comfortable in knowing that you're supported no matter whether you're on the clock or off.
100%. And I think too, like it's important, like no one wants to feel like they're broken or they're alone or they're the only ones experiencing this. And so I think the more that we can have our shared experiences, the less isolating it's going to feel if someone does need those resources or does need to reach out for help. Because I think that we tend to do that. Right? We're like, we don't want anyone to know, or like, especially if no one's having a conversation about it, like you definitely don't want to talk about it then. But the more you can, as peers talk about it, the more leadership can say, hey, like I went through it too, and here's what I did. And it's totally normal to do this. And that doesn't like make me any less of a chief. That doesn't make me weak. That makes me super strong. And it makes me, it puts me in a position where I can do this job really effectively because I was able to do those things, and get past them and thrive. And so I really like that you have that mindset. And I know you said that when you were maybe coming up in this profession, that wasn't necessarily what it was, right? Like it was that like, tough it up, like keep going. And to your point, do that on your own time. Like that's not something that we're going to support organizationally. How did you arrive in the mindset that you have now when you came up maybe in a generation that wasn't that way? How did you personally kind of like step outside of that and kind of, evolve your mindset into this now wellness mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's probably a bit of a multifaceted answer. It's not any one given thing, but certainly, we're looking around at how we can set ourselves apart. How can we be different? And of course, to some degree, that always is going to relate back to hiring and staffing, right? You want to keep your people, you want to attract new people when you have vacancies. And so we started trying to think a little outside the box. What can we do that nobody else is doing? And then, you go to conferences and there's, a company here and a company there that has, this initiative or this app or this program. And that kind of came into my mind that, that wellness is something that we don't really have any policy on. We don't have a practice. We're not really doing anything. You have your attaboys when you get a good arrest or something like that, a slap on the back and a challenge coin, but that's not really wellness. Awards is part of wellness, but that can't be the whole picture, right? So back in 23, as a command staff, we all got together and started thinking, and that's the other thing. I need to credit all my staff that works here. It's not just me. I'm not some guru of wellness. This was a conglomerate of multiple different minds coming together on this. But we all sat down and said, what can we do with regards to officer wellness? And we really kind of had like a roundtable discussion. What would you want? What would you want in a wellness program? What can we do that, our competitors aren't doing? Competitor meaning, trying to attract qualified officers or new recruits. And then, of course, what are they doing down the road that we could steal that idea? Idea theft is rampant in law enforcement. We joke about it, but if we hear about a good idea down the road, we're definitely going to do what we can to steal that and pick it up and bring it home. So it was kind of a mix of several different things. But I think wellness, certainly from a personal standpoint, there's always kind of that in the back of your mind. Like, I wish we had this when I was on the road, when I was a young 20-something officer, working night shift, working calls, chasing people through the woods and all that stuff. I wish we had something like this when I was on the road. So a little bit of a desire to, make it better for the people coming up behind you.
I love idea theft.
Yeah,
I think that's hilarious.
It's like policy theft too. You need a good chase policy or a good pit maneuver policy. Well, they got a good one down the road. Let's just get theirs, change the name, and then that's the new policy.
Yeah, but I also think it's this concept of like, you guys are stronger together, and if other people have a good idea or have something that's successful, like, why not borrow or steal, that idea for yourselves. And like you said before, not everything's a one size fits all. So something that works for someone else might not necessarily work for you guys. But I think it kind of goes back to that idea of like isolation. The more agencies I talk to, it's really interesting. I feel like you guys are kind of siloed on your own island sometimes. And it's like, there's so many other people in the network that you could, reach out to and see what they're doing and kind of like band together. And sometimes it's almost like you forget that there's like neighboring agencies that you can like reach out to see, what's going on. And of course, I know, maybe you want to be unique to yourself and maybe you want to hold your cards close, especially if it's a hiring thing. Like you want to have a little bit of an edge maybe over the competition, like you said. But I do like that of like, how can we be unique to ourselves? How can we make sure that we're supporting our people and their needs, because that might be different from other organizations, but how can we also maybe come together as a community and figure out, what is working really well?
Absolutely. And to your point, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So if we have a good idea, you can't keep it secret. So it's going to get out eventually. And, I've already shared some of the things we do with our wellness program with some other agencies, because at the end of the day, if you can make the entire profession better, that's better. That's a win for everybody. Yeah. So, a good idea is going to get out. And then the way to counter that is come up with the next good idea. What's the next thing?
Yep. I love it. I would really love for you to kind of explain maybe all the things, or you can highlight the things that you want to highlight that you guys have done organizationally, because you have some really unique stuff. Like I've talked to a lot of agencies around the country, and you had mentioned a couple of things where I'm like, I've never heard of that before. So what are you guys doing now organizationally with wellness?
Yes. So I'm very excited to talk about this. We are proud of our program. So actually, let me step off here just for a moment and grab a little prop so I can demonstrate what we're talking about. So first and foremost is our rewards program. Every year we create some new poker chips. So this is our 2025 poker chip. And it's got a different design on the back each year. This particular one, we let the officers design the 25 chip on the back, and we'll come up with a 26 one soon. So the reward chips can be given out for any number of things. Number one, we track officer stats and everything like that. So if they have a really strong month, and it's not just traffic stops and tickets, it's all inclusive. How many foot patrols, reports, accident reports, how many community policing events did you do, stuff like that. So we will give the reward chips away. Or of course, if they get a phone call, a commendation, hey, Officer Joe was very nice to me. He did a great job. The report was excellent. He's a big help. We'll give him a chip for that. So they can save up these chips. And first of all, they get one every year. year, with the idea being every year of service, you've got one with the year on it. So if you served in 25, you've got a chip for 25. And every year of service, you've got a chip for that year. But then above that, they can save them up and actually cash in the reward chips for actual real rewards. So it's on a tiered system, with the cheapest reward being for 3 tokens, where you could get like a neck massager or something like that. And then as the number of chips you're redeeming goes up, kind of the value of the prize goes up. So I'm looking over at our cabinet. We've got like a t-shirt. You can get a Fairburn PD t-shirt and a hoodie to go with it. We've got a massage gun. We've got a Yeti cooler. Moving down, you can get a K-bar knife if you want to carry one on duty. We've got the Bose headset, where if you want to wear your earbuds while you're at the gym, they're waterproof and sweatproof and noise canceling and all that, and multiple other different kinds of rewards. And the rewards are not just stuff I'm sitting here coming up with. We actually will do a survey each year to the officers and say, hey, what do you want? We started out the first year, and some of the rewards, nobody picked them. So we're like, okay, that's not a good pick for the rewards. We need to talk to the rank and file. And they start giving us ideas. Hey, I'd love to get, again, the headphones, the Bluetooth headphones, or the K-bar knife, or the t-shirt, anything like that. So we're constantly modifying what the rewards are based on the officer's preferences. So what they say they want, that's what goes in there. And that was a little bit of a challenge at first, because we had to, obviously any law enforcement agency, city, county, or state, federal, whatever, you always have to justify your budget. So, of course, we have to go to city leadership and say, hey, I need to buy a massage gun and a Massage Envy gift card. I got to buy all these things with the city budget. And you get a couple of raised eyebrows, and you say, well, this is why we're doing it. This is not just for chief's use on the weekends. This is going to sit in a cabinet. We have all the rewards logged and tracked. We've got a log system. So, this many chips were handed in, this reward was handed out. So everything's, logged and tracked. So it's not just stuff being given away, for nothing. They're actually redeeming the chips for rewards. So, and the reward program has actually been a big hit. The officers get to save up the chips. They get to cash in their rewards. We had an air fryer last year. Somebody wanted an air fryer for the kitchen. So we had one of those, gave one of those away. So that's our reward program, our kind of poker chip program. And we're a big fan of that. Yeah. So
I really like that. Do you think that has helped to build more of a culture of wellness and, productivity and like showing up with a good attitude? Like, I'm thinking of all the things that could be a result of that, of people being like, I want to show up and do a really good job because I want to do a good job. I'm guessing, like, because I care about this community, I care about this department. But if I can also win an air fryer, it's like an added bonus. And like, I want to cash that in, So have you seen that, like, an increase in productivity, like an increase in morale? Like what has been kind of that ROI, I guess?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our productivity tracker, we track every officer, their activities. And we didn't just kind of create like an arbitrary number and say, you got to do, X amount of traffic stops or X amount of reports. We take the average of what the department as a whole, what the average productivity looks like. And that's the standard. So the officers set the standard for what's considered, average productivity. And again, the productivity takes into effect all things, traffic stops and foot patrols and reports and all that. So by them setting the standard, they choose whether or not that standard goes up and down, and it's never gone down. It continues to kind of inch up over as the years go by. And then on top of that, they have kind of, because officers are smart, they know how to figure things out. They kind of have started to recognize what will get them reward chips. And again, if you think you've got an air fryer or some nice Bluetooth headphones, in the wings waiting for you, they're going to figure out how to get those chips faster. So we see kind of increased productivity. We typically give out the chips when they come to a community event. So if we do National Night Out or Shop with a Cop or one of those events, they think, hey, I'll probably get a chip if I show up to that on my day off. So, and I've got 10, I need 12, to cash in for X rewards. So you also get a little bit more of that, community event buy-in if they know they're going to get, it's only a poker chip, but if they see the big picture, they know that there may be a bigger reward waiting down the line.
Yeah. And incentives work, but I also would imagine there's maybe a little bit of a competitive nature to it too, of like, I'm going to get my 12 chips before you, like I'm going to that community event or whatever. And so they build like that camaraderie, and that's cool. No, I really like that. Like I said, when you told me about them, like I've never heard about anything like that before. So I thought that was really unique. What else? What else are you guys doing?
So our annual awards are something, of course, officer recognition. Recognition is a big part of wellness, and that's kind of, part and parcel with the poker chip program. But it's not something that we were doing consistently, right? Every now and again, we'd have an officer really do something above and beyond, and we might bring it before mayor and council. But beginning in 23, we said we're going to formalize this process. So every year, the whole department is going to vote. Officer of the Year, Detective of the Year, Supervisor of the Year, Rookie of the Year. And it's not just like here's a certificate. We order a ribbon that they can wear on their uniform. They get a certificate. They get a little award that they can put in their car or at their house, something physical and tangible that, when people come over and they see the award sitting on the mantle, or sitting in the living room. Hey, what's that? Oh, I was Officer of the Year last year. That's something that you can take home, and that's theirs forever. They'd be, retired, and they'll have that reward, that award sitting on in the house. So we really formalize that process. And not only do we give them the award and the certificate and the ribbon to wear on their uniform, we bring them before mayor and council. So roughly January, February, about beginning of the year, because they vote usually in the last couple of months at the end of the calendar year. But we will bring them to a mayor and council meeting and actually bring the officers up, announce their name, the years of service, any noteworthy biographical facts about them that they're comfortable with us sharing, and really make it a formal process. So that annual awards program, I think, is really important too. And that, again, you see some competitiveness. The officers are all wanting to get that Officer of the Year, Detective of the Year, whatever it may be. And again, I think it's beneficial for the department to just make it a formal process.
Yeah. How important do you think it is for people to feel valued? Just like that. I know it's a recognition program, but to me, it's like value, right? Like I feel like I'm valued as an employee, as a person. How important do you think that is within the organization?
I think it could be the defining characteristic of an agency, certainly when it comes to hiring and recruiting and retention. Certainly in a more large metropolitan area like Atlanta, a lot of the, agencies are going to pay roughly the same. You might have a few thousand here, a few thousand there difference on either side. So how you feel when you come to work is a huge part of that equation. When officers feel valued, they're happy. They want to come to work. They want to do a good job. They want to make a name for themselves in the department. Suddenly they see themselves progressing up the ranks in the agency, and not just, this is just a job and it's just a paycheck. They start thinking about making a career here. It's not everybody, that does 20, 30 years with the same agency. We see a lot of kind of agency hopping, oftentimes for, a little bit of pay. So if you've got that feeling of being valued, that's the kind of thing that'll make someone want to stay, because they feel like, they've got a voice, they're heard, they're appreciated, they're valued. And I think that's a huge part of, again, kind of making your agency stand out from the rest, that recognition, that making them feel valued. And at the end of the day, it's a crucial retention tool, in my opinion. I think if you're not making sure your people feel appreciated, they might be thinking that the agency down the road might make them feel appreciated.
Yeah, 100%. And I agree with you. I think value really impacts mental wellness. I have definitely been in situations where I did not feel like I was valued, and what that does to how you feel mentally, especially over a long period of time. You could imagine someone who doesn't want to show up to work. They're like, our agency doesn't value me or what I do, what that would do to your mood, your productivity, your morale, over time. And I would personally much rather work for someone or an organization who values me over someone who pays me a little extra cash. And so I think we are seeing that, especially with the younger generation. I think that a lot of the younger guys and girls who are entering into this profession are looking for those things. Do you care about me? Do you care about my family? And, am I going to be able to come and work in an environment where I feel valued and supported and taken care of? And that's why I do agree with you. I think that wellness programs play a role in that of hey, these are the things that we do to show you that we value you, because we all know that actions and words are so different. And a lot of people are looking how are you going to show me that I'm a valued member of this organization?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, and for what it's worth too, even the city of Fairburn at large, and this was not just the police department, but I think the city, and I've actually had several meetings with our HR director about the city's wellness initiatives that encompass, all city departments, including the PD. It wasn't, I think maybe just a year and a half, maybe, the city instituted like a paid parental leave policy, which is brand new. Some agencies are doing this, some aren't. Fairburn had never done it before up until, like I said, about a year and a half ago, and the city put that policy into effect. So you get 6 weeks of paid time off, with the birth or adoption of a child, which is fantastic. A lot of agencies, if you've got the FMLA time, you can take up to 12 weeks if you've got the time. If you don't have the time, it's either unpaid leave with your new baby or you got to come back to work, So right off the bat, the city also has wellness in mind. I got to give them some credit too.
Yeah, no, I like that. I just remembered when you and I were talking offline, I remember, because I want you to kind of jump into some of the other stuff that you guys are doing, because I know you're doing a lot, and maybe highlight some of them. But I remember talking to you and being like, I feel like I'm talking to a California agency, and I had never heard of agencies in your state doing some of these things. I was like, man, this is like, I feel like California or, someone like on the West Coast. So what are some of the other things that you guys are doing that are maybe a little bit progressive?
Sure. So I'll hit a couple of them rapid fire, and then you tell me when you want to talk. So we do an IV hydration program. We're technically right in the middle between vendors right now, but we have a program. We're just looking for a new vendor where once a month, every officer can go get a bag of IV fluid for dehydration. We have paid gym membership, and we allow them to go work out on the clock, not on your time off, on the clock. Call volume allowing. You can go work out on duty. We have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training with a local partner a couple towns over, and we will pay them to go to that training. Costs nothing to the PD. The gentleman offers a service for free, and we pay them to go to that training. Of course, we have a wellness app, which we're getting going right now. So the wellness app, which is kind of multifaceted, got anonymous support, nationwide networks, got a library of resources. We have a peer support program where it's not just something that, you're just a peer supporter because ominous dominus, we said so. They actually go through peer support training. We have a policy on this that specifies that it has to be absolutely confidential. It's actually a significant violation if you violate that confidentiality. And then just in kinds of future, what we're looking at, we just started looking into red light therapy. We have an idea. We'd like to incorporate massage therapy into the program, as well as a wellness canine, where there's actually a dog that can be here at the station, not to go, sniff out narcotics or anything, but just to literally be with the officers and trained, to recognize if they may be in distress or, recently going through some kind of trauma. So that's the rapid fire. We got several different aspects of our program. Which one do you want to hear about?
Well, I want to commend you for everything that you guys are doing. And I think you also said maybe you have like a wellness room as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Like a Zen room too.
Yes. Zen room. Exactly. I'm sorry. I forgot that on my own list.
I didn't forget. I'm prepared.
Earlier this year, where we took an empty office space within the PD and we put first of all, we changed the entire look of the room. So it's got different floor, different paint on the wall. It's got different window blinds. So it's a completely different look and feel. It almost feels like you're not even in the PD anymore. We put a couple of lazy boys in there, the big reclining chairs. We've got a little water machine to you get that trickling water sound. We've got an actual sound machine in there. And the Zen room policy is if you're just kind of having a day and you need a minute, any member of the PD, and that includes civilian staff, because our civilian staff, Lord knows, they get it, they go through it too. Certainly some of the phone calls and emails they got to deal with. So any police department staff member can go into that Zen room and just kind of take a break, take a 10 or 15 minute, leave your phone at your desk, switch your radio off, as long as obviously the supervisor knows you're taking a break, and they can go into this Zen room and just kind of find that center and kind of refocus, their mind and their thoughts, and it gets used. We thought, this may be something people want. And since we opened it, it gets used consistently. We've got a little door latch where you can even see if it's in use or, occupied or vacant. And, it's regular that I'll walk through the building and sure enough, that switch is flipped and it's being used. And of course, we never, we don't need to know who's in there. As long as it's being used, we're happy.
Yeah. When you started 20 years ago, would you ever imagine that your PD would have a Zen room?
No, I probably would have been laughed out of the building. What do you mean you need a few minutes to gather yourself or your thoughts? So, yeah, no, I couldn't even imagine it 20 years ago. No.
No, I think we've come a long way. And, I've been in this wellness space now for 8 years and almost 9 years, I guess now. And even back then, it wasn't a thing. Like you said, I know this has been a couple of years in the making, but I think we've made really big strides in the last few years of what wellness looks like and kind of pushing the boundaries of, what is possible when it comes to wellness. And I really like, and we talked a little bit offline, and I really want to focus on this a little bit with you because I really like your mentality of like, what's next? What else can we do? What are people asking for? What are our limitations? And, what can we do to kind of push that a little bit? And, I've never heard of an agency with an IV program. I thought that was really cool. We talk a lot about like the importance of hydration and, but to have an agency that's like, we have an IV program. Where every month they can do this. We have a Zen room. We have all of these things. But then what you told me was, and we're having constant conversations about how can we add more? And so often I think that, a lot of people, and I try to do this with myself too. It's like, there's no destination, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes you kind of get stuck. You're like, all right, we have this really robust wellness program, check. And that's it. We're good. We've arrived. And I think that to always have that growth mindset of like, how can we make this better? What are things that we can continue to improve on or add to so that we make sure that everyone feels supported? And obviously, I think that there's limitations or challenges with that. And I would love to hear you because we have a lot of listeners who are in leadership who are trying to build out these wellness programs and, trying to figure out where to start and what to do. And so how do you think that agencies can kind of think outside the box and continue to grow and evolve and develop their wellness programming while also having challenges of buy-in and funding? Because we know that those are maybe the top two that we hear all the time is like, well, how are we going to get people to utilize these things so that we know that it's successful? Like, where do we know to put our limited funds, or how do we even get funding if we don't have any baked into the budget? So are you able to maybe give a little bit of your experience with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think those are great points, and kind of piggybacking off what you said. Number one, I think if you're going to think outside the box and you want to keep your program fresh, like you said, it's not just check a box and you're done, right? And the parallel I'll draw was kind of similar to like community policing. When community policing started becoming bigger, you saw a lot of agencies that would do that. Check the box. We did coffee with a cop one day, once, we're done for the rest of the year. And they say, oh, we do community policing. Well, that's not community policing. You can't do one event one day and say you have a community policing program. So wellness is very much the same thing, in my opinion. I think if you just say, oh, well, we're going to pay for your gym membership, and then that's it, that's your entire wellness program, that's only one aspect of wellness, So I think if you keep yourself fresh by thinking outside the box and always thinking, what's next? What's the next thing? What else can we do on top of this? That's a good place to start. So when you look at what other agencies are doing, talk to your people. I can't stress that enough. Talk to your officers. What do you guys want for a wellness program? You can do a Survey Monkey or 18,000 different ways to talk to your people. I always prefer face to face. I think that's the best way to talk to your folks. I've actually got a book on my desk, Lincoln on Leadership. He used to talk about public opinion baths. I think every chief and sheriff should take public opinion baths with your officers. Go stand in a room with them and talk to them, have those conversations. What do you guys want in a wellness program? What would you want to see? And then once you've instituted that program and you've got it kind of up and running off the ground, again, change your mindset. Don't think, okay, we're done. We have a wellness program, put it in the books and call it a wrap. The first thought should be, what can we do next, either to improve it or to add something new to the program? And then kind of shifting to what you mentioned too about, the difficulties in instituting a wellness program. Obviously, of course, the funding is a huge part of that. Your mayor, your city council, your county commission, whoever it may be that you're getting this money from, they've got to have that buy-in with the program. I think the best way to get that is to have, again, those one-on-one conversations with them. It's always tough during live government meetings to kind of really get your point across. So I'm a big fan, again, of just that, informal communication process when you're just having those one-on-one communications and saying, look, this is a wellness program. This is what it can do, and just explain that a happy, well-adjusted law enforcement officer is a happy, well-adjusted public servant. That's going to be a better officer to serve the community that you're chief or sheriff over. So once you can explain that process, I think you'll have a better chance at getting that buy-in from your elected officials who are going to send you that money for the program. Then, of course, you got the internal buy-in, which kind of goes back to that old school thinking. Why do we need this? We didn't have hydration therapy when I was on the road. We didn't have Brazilian jiu-jitsu training. We didn't have none of that. And just explain, no, we didn't, but cars didn't used to have seatbelts either. It doesn't mean you don't need them. It just means that they weren't around back then. It's a good thing, though. So getting that internal buy-in, and I think a big part of that is leadership modeling the way to a degree. As a chief, deputy chief, captain, lieutenant, whatever your rank structure is, if your leaders are modeling the behavior that you want, meaning your leaders are upfront and open saying, hey guys, I really want you to look at this wellness program, go work out. There's no calls, holding, everything, the radio's clear right now. Go hit the gym, go walk for 30 minutes, modeling that behavior and encouraging that kind of thing to your rank and file and making sure these officers see this is not just a talking point. This is something we really care about. We care about your wellness. We care about your well-being. And that I think is a big part of it too. When you get the leadership, modeling the way, I think that's a big part in overcoming that old school thinking and maybe any internal resistance to change, and something new, which, the only constant in our profession is change. So.
Yeah. There are quite a few things I want to touch on what you said. When you are thinking about leadership and promotions and, hiring, is that something that you consider as someone who is on board with wellness initiatives and someone who is going to help to move this forward? Because that's one of the things I hear all the time. It's like, yeah, we really want to do this, but we got a handful of sergeants that are, salty. They're not into it and they're not on board. They're not going to do these things. And so are you looking for that? Is that a quality where you're like, I want my leadership team to be on the same page as me when it comes to wellness?
Absolutely. I think anytime we do a promotional process, of course, you've always got that base standard of, qualified. You got to meet the policy qualifications to be promoted. Usually there's some kind of knowledge assessment. Oftentimes there's some kind of oral board assessment where, you're talking to some interviewers. They give you a scenario. But kind of the higher the rank, the more I'm going to weigh, do you see the bigger picture for the department? Do you see the future? Do you see the vision? Because if I've got an idea of where I want to take the agency, I'm not going to promote someone who's going to try to pull me back or go the opposite way, So certainly the higher the rank, the more I'm going to consider that. Do you see where we're trying to go here? And wellness is certainly one of those things. I think it's a bigger picture than just wellness, of course. And it's never going to be 100% matched, of course. No two personalities are the same. But I think when you think about the core principles of what kind of agency you're trying to build, do you want to promote people, especially to command level positions, that share a similar vision to you do as a leader?
Yeah, no, I can see that. And there were two things that you said too. It's the public opinion baths. I've never heard that in my life. And how humbling I would guess that is, to talk to people and to get their honest feedback on, what is going well, what isn't, what can we do to add, what are you guys looking for? Because I think so often we get so stuck in our own ways sometimes. And I'm so guilty of this where I'm like, this is a great idea. This is going to be awesome. Everyone's going to love it. And then I roll something out and everyone's like, we didn't even want that. We're that's not even what we're looking for. And then you're like, oh, and then it's it brings you back down. You're like, oh yeah, this isn't about me. This is about them and what they want and what they need. And talking to them is so important. And getting that candid feedback. I really like that public opinion bath. Yeah. I also,
I'm stealing that from the book, but so it's not mine. thought, but it resonated with me too. And I think, one of the things I do annually, and I only do it once a year. I might need to bump it up to twice a year, but usually at the beginning of each calendar year, I will have a 10 to 15 minute sit down with every single member of the agency, officers and non-sworn staff. And I give them an open floor. They can tell me, whatever is on their mind. I say, kind of like a stoplight survey. What should we stop doing? What should we continue doing? What should we start doing? What's good? What's bad? What's ugly? And I give them an open mic. And any chief or sheriff who's going to do that, my recommendation is you leave your ego at the door when you walk in, because these officers will tell you what is on their mind. If they feel comfortable and they feel like you've created an environment for them to really speak their mind, they will. And they will tell you what they think that you're doing is a great idea and what is just garbage. And they're not shy about it if you've built that level of comfort with them.
Yeah. No, I would imagine. I can imagine what that room would look like. But I think the key point to what you said is, did you build a culture of trust to where they feel like they can come to you and say that? Because if they're saying that to you, it's because they care, because that they actually care about the organization and it being better, so for someone to voice that to you, it means that you've created an environment where they feel like they can talk to you instead of saying, I'm fine, everything's fine. It's fine, which is, I would way prefer that. I would way prefer someone come up to me and be like, this is where you're messing up, or this is where I don't see value or whatever, than someone being like, yep, it's good when it's not.
Exactly. That is exactly how I know that I need to spend more time with an officer. If they come in for the one-on-one with me, when they're given an open floor to speak their mind and they say, everything is great, nothing could be better, there's no change necessary, I'm like, all right, I haven't built that relationship yet. I need to work on that, because that officer clearly is not being 100% upfront. Everybody has ideas for improvement or change, or how we might, make this process a little better. It could be small, but everybody's got something on their mind, So when I hear, oh, everything's perfect, I know I got to work on that relationship.
It's like that immediate red flag that goes up where you're like, alert, yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's really insightful. The other thing you said was the thing about seatbelt. I thought that was hilarious. But what popped into my head is that, to me, and I don't know if you agree, and feel free to disagree, but to me, I see wellness training as safety training. The more that you can be good physically, the less likely you are to be injured, right? Which is safety. The better you feel mentally, the more effective decisions that you can make. That's safety, And so you related it to cars never used to have seatbelts, and the seatbelts were added as a safety precaution, right? This is to keep you from flying out the windshield, and we're going to make sure that we keep you here as long as we can. And if and when something does happen, we got you. And to me, that's what wellness is. It's how can we start reframing this as, yes, it's wellness, but it's safety. We want to make sure that physically and mentally, you can withstand a 20, 30 year career, and you can walk out of here still being able to move, still being able to enjoy life in all forms, and so I really like that you said that, because I really do think that wellness is related to safety.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that idea. I think it's undisputed. And again, I'm not a data scientist or a researcher, but I've seen it over and over. Law enforcement has increased rates of suicide, alcoholism, divorce, and the list goes on, right? We're either doing something to combat that, or you're not, and if wellness is going to help us in any of those areas or all of the above, then so be it. You owe it to yourself and to your agency to try to do something about that. I've even read that, a lifelong law enforcement officer is going to have reduced overall lifespan. Sometimes some things I've read were, 10, 20 years. So, what are we doing about that? Are we just going to accept that as status quo and, oh, well, you're a cop, so, enjoy your third divorce and alcoholism? No, that's not okay. We need to do something about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that brings me to my next point is what is the long-term ROI on wellness programming? Because I think too, it's pay now or pay later, right? And so when you're talking about funding and buy-in, and all of these are proactive measures to make sure that on the back end, everyone's good, right? Like you are essentially like prepaying for these to be proactive, to try to minimize injuries, to try to minimize mental health issues, substance abuse issues, things of that nature. And I think that sometimes we forget that. It's like the ultimate goal is the people, right? The ultimate goal is the longevity. And of course, like those are going to have impacts in different ways. But what do you think the long-term impact of implementing proactive wellness measures is going to have on your team, or maybe even on the profession as a whole?
I think certainly as a whole, I think you'll end up with officers serving longer. It was more commonplace, and this is purely my perception. This is not a fact, just my perception, my opinion, that, you used to hear about officers who would serve an entire career in law enforcement, 20, 25, 30 years. And that was, pretty routine. Whereas seemingly in more modern times, it definitely feels like officers will do this job, but then after 5, maybe 10 years, they're like, you know what? I'm done. That's enough. It's too much. Between the not high pay and everything that comes along with the job, the stress and the trauma and the difficult hours, working nights, weekends, holidays, all that. So I think if we can focus on wellness, you'll get an extended career long term out of more police officers, sheriff's deputies, where they can think, okay, with this wellness program that really gives you more of that work-life balance, you'll see deputies and officers that are going to be able to do this job longer. Ideally, in a perfect world, you'd see some of those programs we talked about in terms the numbers we talked about, alcoholism, divorce, suicide. If we can get those numbers down, that's a win for everybody. Nobody wins with any of those things. If we can get those rates down, I think that would be hugely beneficial to the entire profession nationwide. And overall, I just think that you get, like I said earlier, a happy, well-adjusted law enforcement officer is a happy, well-adjusted public servant. They're going to go give better service to the communities that we serve when their life is better, and that's not just pay, that's overall wellness.
I completely agree. And I think too, it's a message to show people like it's not inevitable that you are going to end up XYZ. And I think sometimes like that is the message too. It's like, it's inevitable that you're going to end up divorced 3 times. It's inevitable that, you're going to have, alcoholism, it's inevitable that, and I think that sometimes people are like, wow, like I'm just going to end up broken by the end of this. And maybe that's where you start to see that, like, I'm out of here, like I don't want to end up like that. And to have that messaging of like, no, like we are doing this so that you are successful. Does that mean that there's going to be no divorces? No, probably not. But does it mean that we can do like the best possible, on the front end to like try to minimize that, to try to make sure that you have a healthier, happier home life, that you have like financially, you guys, are set up better for success, that, physically, mentally, you're able to offload those things throughout your career so that you feel good, yes, I think that it's totally possible to have that message of like, hey, we're going to be proactive and we're going to make sure that we're doing everything that we can so that you succeed.
Absolutely. And if I could even drive the point home, maybe talk about like divorce and, overall wellness, wellness at home. One of the number one things you hear about with problems in marriages is what? Finances, money, So is your agency doing something with financial wellness? Is that part of either an app or a program or annual training once a year? Hey, do you guys know anything about retirement? Are you thinking about retirement? Are you planning for retirement? What are you doing with your money? Are you straight out of the academy? Do you need that $900 a month car payment as soon as you graduate the academy? You get a little bit of a pay bump, No, maybe not. Like, are you taking the time to help, especially your young new officers? Are you taking the time to really try to mentor them and coach them and say, hey, don't do what I did. You don't need that $900 truck payment, straight out of the police academy. Think about what you're doing with your money, and that I see a direct line between, helping them at work, talking about financial planning and just financial wellness overall. That's a straight line to marriage, right? Because again, money problems, finance is one of the number one causes of marital problems. So it's all interconnected in my mind.
I agree. It's so multifaceted. And I think one thing affects the next, which affects the next. And so having, like you said before, you're like, if you have a gym membership, that's only one piece of the puzzle. And so how can you create that full picture with a lot of different puzzle pieces, put together? Mm-hmm. I usually only ask this in the context of the younger generation, which we will get to, but I would be really interested, because you have built out such a robust program and you have this mindset of like, what's next and how can we continue to move this profession forward and support our people? What words of wisdom would you have, or maybe a piece of advice that you would have for another chief or someone in leadership out there who maybe is in the infancy stages of building a wellness program, or, how to create that culture of wellness within their organization?
If I had to give one piece of advice, it would be baby steps, right? You're not gonna snap your fingers and suddenly you've got this entire robust, well-built wellness program that's funded and supported with the buy-in. You got to take it one step at a time, and it's better to take 2 small steps forward than to not move at all. So baby steps, take it slow, take it easy. You're not going to, rewrite the SOP overnight, so take it easy. If you can make a little bit of progress this year and a little bit of progress next year, that's good. Progress is, forward movement. That's what we want, so don't get discouraged if you don't get the funding, for, the entire spectrum of everything you want. You're not going to get everything right out the gate. But, do what you can, 1 year at a time, one budget at a time, baby steps.
I really like that. Like 1 step forward or 2 steps forward is better than no steps forward, because I think that sometimes you do get in that like almost paralyzing state of like, well, we can't, so we don't, instead of like, okay, well, how can we, but maybe in like a small way, how can we just try to keep that ball moving forward, even if it's incremental? So I really appreciate that. And I think that also goes back to, and I know you didn't mean it this way, but I was sick this last weekend and I went to the gym, and I went to the gym for like 15 minutes because I was just like dying. Right. And I told myself what I tell everybody else that I work with is something is better than nothing, and even if it is 5 minutes, 10 minutes, do what you can, because a little bit of something every day creates huge impact over time, right? And so if you can have that mentality, like you said, of incremental change, 1 step in front of the other, I think that we severely underestimate the impact and the power that has long term. And like you said, zooming out and kind of seeing the big picture, just 1 step at a time, even if it's little.
Absolutely. So I'm going to show a little bit of my true colors here. I'm a big nerd. I love sci-fi and fantasy, Star Trek, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. And some of that includes like the time travel stuff, right? Now I saw something that came across one of my social feeds the other day that exactly speaks to your point. So, you see the time travel movies, right? Where they go back in time and they see that one small little change has dramatic impacts on the future. And everyone's good with that, right? But if you flip that around and you think if you make one small change today, what kind of impact can you have on your own future down the line, right? And that stuck with me. And I think, okay, like you said, do a little bit. And if you can do a little bit right now, that can turn into something much bigger down the road.
I completely agree. I think it's that concept of like also like making your future self proud. I try to live by that too. I really like that. All right, my last question. What words of wisdom do you have for the younger generation? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier, or something that's helped you along the way.
The younger generation, I would say, and I don't think this is controversial, but I think it's important to have a support system outside of law enforcement. And I know that sounds crazy because we just spent all this time talking about a support system inside of law enforcement and the wellness and, agency, funded wellness. But I do think it's important to be able to kind of decouple and not be in the law enforcement world 24/7. I think it is important to be able to go home and spend time with not only family, but also friends, where law enforcement is not always the focus. Law enforcement is not your entire life. You do not have to be on with that hypervigilance 24/7. You've got to, be able to put that down and enjoy the rest of your life. I don't care if it's hiking or gardening or whatever it is. Make sure you've got something that's a hobby, something for you to do that you enjoy that does not involve a badge and a gun. I do think that's important to have that support system, that life outside of the badge.
Thank you.
Happy to. Thank you for having me on.
I had so much fun today. I thought this was a great conversation, and thank you for everything that you're doing in wellness. And I know that there's a lot of value that people are going to get from this. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
Of course.